Hey guys, welcome back. So in this lecture, we're going to see the difference between the GraphQL API versus REST API. Because this is a very important topic to understand, or the benefits, why we needed some different technology, create another API, name is GraphQL, whereas REST API is very popular. Okay, so why it's GraphQL we need? So to understand that things, we need to see the differences, the differences between the GraphQL and the REST API. There is a one, the side Azura that's have a very nice example. I'm going to demonstrate to understand that part. So let's say, we have an API to fetch a user profile and their address. So if I want to fetch that kind of information using an API, using a typical REST API, that time the scenario could be like this. So this is your REST API, assume that. And then, to get the user profile, we might send a one GET request. You can see this is the, HTTP request, for REST API, they use a different HTTP request, GET, POST, PUT, DELETE, and so on. So here is a GET request. This is the GET request. This is the endpoint for the GET request. Whereas you can use the ID, specifically say user ID you wants to the fetch, which is the ID number 1. So this is your one request, and as a result, the HTTP response would be from the API like ID for 1. This is the name. Now you may need more information because we want to have the address also for this user. That time you might need to run another GET request, which is for the using the same user ID equals to 1, but it is for the specific address. That's the REST API. You will see that it works. We have to run lots of requests. You have to send lots of different type of requests, and for to have the different type of response using the REST API endpoint. Here is another GET request where it as a response, it will give you the street name, the city, and so on. So here is, using the REST API, here is we had to send a to GET request, right? So it is a multiple works that we have to do a back and forth route, the to GET request to get the exact or the response we're looking for the ID 1, the profile name, as well as the address. Let's see how GraphQL works for the same type of request. You can see over here, this is a visualization for the GraphQL API. So that time the GraphQL API query request would be, and GraphQL again, one thing to let you know, GraphQL only does the query request, only does the post request. Unlike REST API, it has the get, put, post, delete, but GraphQL the only the request, the HTTP request, which is the post. There's nothing else. So here is a query. In this query, you can say you can mention, for query, you can mention the user ID you want to retrieve. You want to fetch the user, specifically user ID. And in this user ID, what exact element you want to retrieve, you can mention over here. ID, name, and an address. In an address, you can even make a sub request, the street, city, town, or the country, as you want, as you wish. So this request, this is the one request, and as a response, you will get a response like that, user for the ID, and then this is the name, and this is the address you will get. So here is a one query request you're sending to have your desired output or response through the GraphQL, whereas compared to REST API, you might need to send it to request or even more. So, this is one of the, the big difference between the, the GraphQL API and the REST API, how those things works. Okay. And even REST API, a lot of times you'll see that when you send a request, along with your response, you get a lot of others extra, the data, which is probably you don't need. You are not looking for those data, but this is the way it's designed, the server or data model, it will respond like this way. But in REST in GraphQL API, you can specify it. You can make a limit. exactly what you're looking for, and based on your limit, based on your requirement, it will respond as it is. There will be no more, there will be no extra return, extra data, or even less. Okay, so it will, as a result, what's happened, you are sending less request and you are getting the response as you need. So it is a very faster, efficient, the process. Okay, that's one of the big advantages of the GraphQL API. Here is the another example, that you can say the GraphQL API query and also REST API over here as a client. When you send a request through the query, here is an example over here. Assume that this is the API related with the asset, and those assets, it's comes with the album ID and then URL for assets to have the all asset details. You can see the even is assets, the comment, the comment made by the customer. So you can write your query like this asset, and then it's asset part of what album ID, and then you can make it more specific ID. You can ask for the URL, and you can even ask for a specific one even asset, okay, out of all the assets through this, which is distinguished by the ID, and then you can still read all the comments, okay, as a text format. Here it will return something like this, like asset ID, then it's a ID1, then it's a URL for this specific ID1 asset, then it's a comment related, and then the second ID for the second asset and URL and the comments and so on. So you can have very nicely separate response for each and every asset, including with the ID, URL, and the comment by one query. But here, if you use the REST API, you can see, you can have one GET request. By the way, this is the GraphQL. Definitely, it would be the POST request, and here is for the REST API, it will be the GET request since you were fetching the data. So you have one GET request to have, all the assets by the ID. So it will show you return a data like it was the ID1, URL1, ID1, ID2, URL2, and so on. And then you need another GET request so that you can get, based on the different ID, you can have the comments for each and every asset. So here you can see the for ID, say example ID 32, then URL, and then it will get the comment. So you might need at least 2 or maybe more GET requests to get the similar type of response that you are looking for. Okay, whereas the GraphQL give you one single shot to have to narrow down all of your the response what you're looking for, and it will give you as per your request. Okay, so that's the way it's GraphQL works, or the difference between GraphQL and REST API. Hope it's very clear. Now let's say has some key differences. So we already understand. Now you are going to easily understand the key difference, the data fetching. So GraphQL fetch only the data you request. It will retrieve only the data you are requesting. REST API request returns the fixed structured data. So already the way it's already structured, because of GraphQL, it's kind of like when it's a data model, it's a dynamic. So you can customize your request, and based on your request, it will give you the response. But the REST API is a fixed structure, a data model. So as a return, it may give you some more data or less data. Okay, so if it's a less data, then you have to run another request. Multiple resources. GraphQL get multiple resources in one request. So when the response comes for a request on GraphQL, the resource could be different server. Okay, database 1, database like AWS database server 1 to 3. But its response all come together from different server and isolated with the GraphQL server, which is compact all of your answer and it will get back to you. And the REST API, for the REST API often requests multiple endpoints and round trip. because we know this for the REST API, you might need to send a multiple requests back and forth, to get your desired response. Next, it's the endpoints. So endpoints for GraphQL uses a single endpoint. Okay, it's always uses single endpoint, which is a /GraphQL. You will see soon when we are going to do an example GraphQL API. You will see that the endpoint is always something like that /GraphQL. But the REST API uses multiple endpoints, one per resources. So like /user, /post, /id, so you have seen that during our all different example for the REST API. So they have a, different type of endpoints. And next topic is about it overfetching or underfetching. That's also big topic, the big difference between the GraphQL and REST API. So GraphQL avoids both by letting your request specific fields, and the REST API can overfetch or underfetch due to the fixed responses. So we know this GraphQL doesn't respond anything less or more. It is very specific, based on your request. A specific field you can mention what you want to return. And for the rest, as we have seen, that it needs a multiple request, round trip, so the response come back with could be the like overfetching data, or sometimes it's list fetching data. Versioning. GraphQL, no need for versioning. It's a flexible queries. But the REST often uses the versioning, like API. You have seen that in the endpoint of the REST API, the versioning it has a version 1, version 1.2, version 1.3, and so on. Error handling. For the error handling, GraphQL errors are returned in a structured arrays, the errors array. Whereas the REST API uses HTTP status code. We know that the REST API is like 200, 400 series, 500 series, and so on to understand your error. Okay, so that's all pretty much is the difference between the GraphQL versus the REST API. Thank you.